Hi, I'm Mark and I'd like to talk about British politics from an outside view. The Conservative Party is facing the worst results since its founding in these parliamentary elections in Great Britain this week. And are the Tories moving further to the right then? And could the right-wing populist Reform UK boss Nigel Farage even take over the leadership? Well, a look at history suggests this even. Just 3 weeks ago, Prime Minister Sunak was confident and a bit quick-witted during the election campaign, but now he seems defensive and subdued because the Tory party is in doomsday mood. The right-wing Conservative populist Nigel Farage, the head of Reform UK, is stealing votes from the Conservatives, even though they are already in a historically bad position. According to polls, the Tories could receive the smallest number of seats in Parliament since their founding. Anything other than a clear victory for the Social Democratic Labour Party would be quite a surprise this week. But such a defeat would lead to a rapid resignation of the current Tory leader Rishi Sunak and an immediate dispute over the future direction of the party, and kind of all experts are certain about that. But which direction will the party take after the election? Observers fear a takeover of power by right-wing extremist forces who sympathize with the rising right-wing populist Farage. Others speculate that an election loss of this magnitude could threaten the existence of the almost 200-year-old Conservative Party. In fact, the current situation may sound familiar to many Conservatives. After all, the Tory party was also in a deep crisis in 2019. Former Prime Minister Theresa May was unable to convince Parliament of her Brexit deal at the time, and the Conservatives suffered massive losses in the European Parliament elections. Their share of the vote had fallen to just 10%. Farage's Brexit party, which had successfully pandered to the people, they won over 30%. And that had never happened before. To counter Farage, the Tories adopted his policies and acted like a right-wing populist party. And this led to the rise of a vocal minority of convinced Eurosceptics who pushed the party towards the radical populist right. That was said by Tim Bailey, he's a political scientist at Queen Mary University of London, and he said that to German media. They were supported by a silent majority who were prepared to elect Boris Johnson to the top to counter the threat posed by Farage and his Brexit party. The Tories were looking for a saviour, and Johnson seemed to be just the right person at the time. He was charismatic and conveyed a drive for action. Many knew he was a villain, at least according to Bale. But despite these reservations, MPs believed that they had no other choice. The former mayor of London was their last resort. But the decision also brought problems. The populist political style did not fit with Conservative economic policy, which is usually characterized by neoliberalism and low taxes. And while Johnson's promise to push through Brexit held the party together for a while, the conflict soon became apparent. That was said by Sophie Stowers of the think tank UK in a Changing Europe. And Johnson quickly turned out to be a charlatan, says Bale. After numerous scandals about parties in Downing Street during the pandemic-related curfews, and because he handled the truth in extremely questionable ways, he was forced out of office in the summer of 22. He has since been followed by two other Conservative prime ministers. Liz Truss, who plunged the British economy into a deep crisis with her so-called mini-budget, and most recently Rishi Sunak. The latter promised change but did not return to the mainstream, instead also using populism to reach voters who sympathize with Reform UK. Sunak should have been more intentional about differentiating his regime from Johnson and Truss, but his thin support base and his own right-wing social and economic values prevented him from doing so, according to Bale. According to Stowers, the Tories tend to blame their electoral defeat on not being right-wing enough. But what happens next will depend on which Conservatives retain their seats. If more right-wing candidates survive, it's conceivable that the party will be pulled in that direction. If there are more centrist MPs, then they may move more to the center. And Bale believes that a major loss is likely to be followed by a change in leadership, with a right-wing populist able to prevail. But could that even be Farage? It's not certain, but it's possible. He probably won't succeed Sunak, but he could replace whoever does, Bale says. And according to polls, the Tory party could receive the smallest number of seats in Parliament, as I said, since its formation, and that will happen just a few days from now. And such a defeat would likely lead to a quick resignation of current Tory leader Sunak and an immediate dispute over the party's future direction. But how will the Tories react after the election? Which direction will the party take? And once again, I can only ask, is there a risk of a takeover by even this rising right-wing populist Farage? In fact, the current situation may sound familiar to some. And I started the video with talking about Theresa May and what was happening there. We all remember the times in Parliament and the Bercow times and everything else. And that there we are a little bit at the only benefit of Brexit, because after this big win for Farage in the European elections, they did everybody else here in the EU a favor by leaving, because they took Farage and his people from the European Parliament as well. But nowadays, a lot of people in Britain do regret that happened at the time, and do regret what happened as a consequence of this European election in the end, because that was one of the things why David Cameron didn't have a choice but making the biggest mistake in his life. But afterwards, while Johnson then came on with his Get Brexit Done and won the big victory in 2019, and he didn't get Brexit done in the end, because Brexit is not done yet. I talked about this in a recent video with all there are still transitional periods in place, and there will be a big impact on the financial centre London next year. So that will be not over for quite some time, because there are several things that are still not in place. Even the checks on the British side are not really in place yet. And even if there would be a miracle on Thursday and the Tories would win, they would have to deal with that. But if the Tories suffer the defeat we all expect, an internal party leadership change is likely, in which a right-wing populist could prevail. But if that's Farage, we will see. But the populist would have finally achieved a long-held goal if he does. But that would not be a gain for the country and the people. It would be quite the opposite. What role the Conservative Party will play as an opposition party is anyone's guess. According to recent election forecasts, the party will have a maximum of 108, but perhaps even as few as 53 MPs. And this means that 21 of 27 cabinet members could lose their constituencies, possibly even Sunak himself. And nobody expects Prime Minister Sunak to play any role after the election defeat. According to party rules, MPs who return to Parliament for the Tory party on July 5th will choose two candidates. The Tory members, whose base leans more towards the right of the political spectrum, will then elect the future party leader. And there's a lot of speculation about this. It goes from Suella Braverman to Penny Mordaunt, but with leaning more to the right, it's rather more probably Braverman than Mordaunt. But Braverman would be a perfect stepping stone for Nigel Farage. So this week is getting very interesting, and there is kind of this Chinese curse a lot of people will remember in this moment. And if you want to know more, the next video is right here in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.